This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Jeff Leisawitz, burns with a mission to inspire screenwriters, artists, filmmakers, musicians, and every other creative human to amp up their creativity, heal their hearts, and shine in the world. Jeff is an award-winning musician, producer, a college instructor, a critically acclaimed author, and internationally distributed filmmaker who has devoted his life to the art of creativity. We'll be talking a lot today about Jeff's first book, Not Effin' Around, the no-bullshit guide for getting your creative dreams off the ground. After this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about how to develop and enhance your creative endeavors, check out www.jeffleisawitz.com, and you can follow Jeff on Twitter at NFAJeff. Well, it's my great privilege to have the creatively inspiring Jeff Leisawitz on StoryBeat. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. How's it going, man? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your creative history. What kind of creative enterprises have you been involved in that led you up to writing a book about being creative?
Right, yeah. I've been a creative guy pretty much my whole life. When I was about 14 years old, I just really turned on to music and knew that I wanted to be a rock star.
Who doesn't?
Really psyched about it. Started playing guitar, electric guitar, got into bass, and at about 15 or 16, I acquired a 4-track cassette recorder. If you and your audience remember that, I started writing songs, tons of songs on this basically crappy little cassette recorder. Played music, played in bands, moved to LA, did all this stuff, got into music for film and TV, produced other albums, won this big award, Best Independent Electronic Artist in the World in 2000. Now, like you mentioned, I teach songwriting. So that's all sort of music stuff. I've also been a photographer pretty much my whole life. When I was a little kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, my grandfather was a photographer, and he bought me this plastic Kodak camera. It was a real camera, but it was like a sort of, wasn't disposable, but it was a real cheap camera, and started taking black and white photos, and he had a darkroom in his basement.
So you learned how to actually take pictures and develop them.
Yeah, but I mean, going in with my grandfather into this darkroom and watching these pictures magically appear in these chemicals, it blew my mind and started my lifelong love affair of photography and images. So that was another piece to it. And then also as a writer, I've been a writer forever. I remember as a kid also writing stories and writing poems and all this and that kind of thing. I took creative writing, in college, and I've written novellas. Now I'm big into screenwriting, written a bunch of screenplays, and made films. So it's really all kinds of that. Those are sort of the three main themes of my creativity.
But in other words, you've led an artistic life full of creative enterprises in a number of directions, as have I. But I find that's not terribly unusual for creative people. But but more often than not, I think people wind up in a niche of some kind and stay there. You have clearly not done that, nor have I. Again, same. So I'm a kindred spirit with you. I understand the notion of doing many different creative enterprises, different outlets. What made you decide to write Not Effin' Around?
Right. Well, I almost didn't decide it. I just kind of did it. One day I woke up, it was a weekend, I went to a coffee shop, as I often do, and just started writing. And I realized I was writing an essay or something about my philosophies around not effing around. And as I was doing it, I realized, wait a minute. The two big sides of me are the creative type, which we just described, but also the empowerment side or the inspirational side. I've always been into that, whether it's been as a summer camp counselor at Camp Log and Twig. I did that for many years.
Log and Twig?
Yeah, Log and Twig. Do you know the Twig?
I do not know the Twigs. I went to a camp called Camp Kiwani. Some people will know that one, but Log and Twig, that's an interesting name. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I'm from Pennsylvania. I didn't tell you that.
Oh,
I'm from Pennsylvania, so
I didn't know
Camp
that.
Log and Twig in Poconos.
Well, Camp Kiwani was also in the Poconos, so we have that in common too.
Nice job, man. We'll take you on in kickball or something.
Yeah, there you go. So you go back in time to that to realize about not effing around?
Well, I mean, that was part of it. It was also, I have trained as a life coach. I'm a life coach. I'm a teacher, like I mentioned, with the songwriting. I also practiced something called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Repatterning, which is a sort of counseling modality that helps people untangle the subconscious blocks in their mind to help them move forward in various ways. So that's a huge part of my personality and who I am. Combining these two sides in this book was so natural for me that it was kind of a no-brainer. And in fact, like I said, I barely even thought about it. I just kind of did it.
Well, let's talk about those two things you just mentioned. Let's talk about life coaching and NLP. What does a life coach do? What do you do as a life coach?
A life coach helps people identify what they want and step forward to reach that, find that in their lives. It helps people become more accountable. It helps people, sort of figure out their plan, get through again their various blocks, all kinds of stuff like that. Me specifically, I do that, but for creative types, right? What are all the ways in which we almost sabotage ourselves to, between where we are and where we want to be creatively? So yeah, and I put that into all my workshops and webinars and all that kind of thing.
We're talking about various blocks, the infamous writer's block and other artistic blocks.
Sure.
And it's then forming a plan or understanding yourself better or all the above. What exactly would you do with someone who comes to you and says, I don't, I'm struggling. I don't know how to make my career go. I don't know how to write this thing, whatever it would be. Where do you start?
Okay, so the first place to start, and also, I mentioned this in the book, or the first chapter is really about this, is discover what you love and why. The huge part of what drives us as people, as humans, is the why. It's really not the what. It's actually the why. So, we would do exercises to help understand why you want to do something. And once you understand what drives your passion, you're way more tapped into that and able to direct your energies towards a goal that matters to you. If it doesn't matter to you, it's never going to have as much energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's true.
Yeah.
And so it's really what is driving you to do what you do. It's not the we have when I was in Hollywood, there were lots of people that are what are known as wannabes. I want to be an actor. I want to be a director. I want to be a writer. I want to be, but they're not doing it. I assume that not effing around has as much as anything to do with just doing it.
Exactly. I had a poetry instructor in college, and she gave me some amazing advice. And this is, a poet is not someone with a bunch of poems on their desk. A poet is not someone who teaches poetry. A poet is someone who writes poems. It's that simple. To be it, you have to do it.
Do it, yes.
So if you're going to be a writer, if you want to be a screenwriter, well, it almost doesn't matter, in a sense, if you're selling these things and making movies. What matters is you write screenplays, right?
Absolutely.
You just sit in there and you do it. And guess what? The more energy you put in and the more time and passion, and again, knowing why you're doing this, the more likely you are to have your success.
It's the Nike thing. Just do it.
Exactly.
And so with, I teach my students all the time, there is no substitute for writing. You can't just buy yourself into being a writer. You have to write.
Mm-hmm.
Writers write. That's what you have to do. And so
Exactly.
okay, so I'm curious about the not effing around part of the not effing around. That is to say, I think that to a certain extent, when you're a creative person, you need occasionally you need to actually back away from the work and let it marinate, or to give it a little bit of artistic space. And so, is there such a thing as effing around while not effing around?
That is correct. As a matter of fact, that's the last chapter of the book, F around.
F around.
Yeah, and what I mean by that is pretty much what you're saying there. You need time. Everybody needs time to defocus, to screw around, to not think, to just be, to meditate, to, just take time off. And it's not lazy. It's not bad. As a matter of fact, it powers you up and gives your mind space to come up with ideas that you may not have been able to come up with while you're, focusing on these things.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, F around is a huge part of the whole process.
The question is whether you're effing around too much or not, or you're not working because you're effing around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not it's not a license to not do anything. It's just a piece of the whole process.
Sure.
And people, if anybody's going to be honest with themselves out there, which is something that you have to do if you're going to be an effective and successful human, is, be in touch with yourself enough to know, am I fucking around too much? You'll know the answer. Everybody knows.
Of course. Okay,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about NLP that you do as well. What's NLP?
NLP. So again, neuro-linguistic repatterning.
Okay.
And it is a series of tools to be used to help, like I said, uncover and untangle subconscious blocks. So the very basics of this is when we are young, we create a map of reality within ourselves.
What does that mean?
And this comes down.
What does that mean to create? What does that mean to create a map of reality? What does that mean?
Right. So two big and basic ways. One is we create beliefs about the world, and that might be the world is a safe place, the world is full of opportunity, the world, wants me to succeed and be happy, and like that kind of stuff. And or it can be other things like everybody's out to get me, or I'm never going to be rich, or it's really difficult to get a job, like whatever, anything, The second part of a big part of the map is identity, how you see yourself, okay, and what you believe about yourself. So again, this can be anywhere on the spectrum from I'm good looking and capable and I can do anything that I choose to put my mind to and things like that, to the sort of negative parts, which are, I'm not smart enough. I don't have the drive to move forward. I'm always going to, fail at my endeavors, things like this.
Right.
So NLP taps in and first understands what these are in the client, right? And then essentially reprograms these things, gives your brain another option so that you can choose a more beneficial thought which is really all it is. If you can believe something more positive about yourself and about the world, you can then take action based on that new thought or reality, and then your world is going to start to shift.
And how does this reprogramming work? What do you do?
Well, we use various language patterns to do this. We use what's called eye access, meaning the way your eyes move in the different quadrants, looking up to the left or down to the right, et cetera, shows how you are, or indicates the ways in which you are thinking, believe it or not. If you are accessing a visual memory or an auditory, a voice, language that you're hearing. So we do that. We do visualization, which I do a lot of in my workshops because it's easy to do with a group. We also do this bit with tapping on your skin, on your arm, to sort of make what they call an anchor to a new thought. So it's all kinds of different things, and this is what you would do in a private session of NLP. And I recommend to any of your listeners, if this sounds interesting to you, find a really good NLP practitioner, because this stuff it's bang bang. It will change you in positive ways. I really highly recommend it.
Okay, good. So, and do you use the NLP or the reprogramming along with the life coach stuff? Is it all in the same bag, or are they two separate things entirely?
No, I mean, I definitely combine these two, and, if I'm working with a private client, it's different than when I'm working with, a small group of, clients, which is a little bit different than a classroom full of, 40 people. I obviously have to approach it a little bit differently to make it effective for all the people.
Of course.
So, but yes, I mean, I draw on all of that. All of that is also in the book, not overtly. It's sort of baked into the, my philosophy and stuff like that. But yeah, it's all there.
Okay, great. So let's talk about putting the book together itself. You sat down in a coffee shop one day and started writing, and then it dawned on you were taking your philosophical point of view and you were expressing it in writing in some way. And how long did it take for you to figure out, oh, wait a minute, maybe I have a book here I could use? Was it right away, or did it take some time?
It was right away. I mean, I think in that first writing session, I just wrote something, and as I sat there all jacked up on coffee, I was like, wow, that felt so good to write this, and I can expand on this significantly. I think I have a book. I literally did not show up at the coffee shop thinking, oh, what should I write a book about today?
Right.
I just, some days I'll go and I'll write poems. Some day I'll free write. Some days, who knows what. As a writer, you just do whatever, unless you're on a project. But I was not on a project. I just went and I started writing, and I just knew it, and then I pursued it.
Okay, so once you started writing it, how long did it take you to write the book so that it was good enough to go out to show someone else?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was just a really part-time venture at that point. I was just doing it on the weekends or, once in a while during the weekdays when I had some time. It took maybe 6 months to write it, and then, and revise it and all that kind of stuff. And then, it really didn't take that long, because I have been living it, right? I mean, There wasn't really research to do. There wasn't a whole lot to conjure up from my imagination. It was just kind of writing down what my beliefs are around all this stuff in a coherent format.
Sure, that makes total sense. You weren't creating fiction. You were just taking what you have known for a long time and expressing it in a concrete form rather than it just being amorphous. I think that's a very good way to approach anything, even fictional stuff. Though fictional stuff takes usually a lot more thinking or planning or development than something that you just are reflecting or reporting essentially on what it is that you've been doing. You acted as a journalist of a sort in putting the book together. It's a very easy read, by the way. It's very clear and understandable. It does not take long to read at all, which is I think a big advantage. So nobody's going to feel burdened by picking up your book and trying to figure it out. You can read it in a fairly short sitting in an afternoon, which is great.
Plus 23 illustrations, cartoons.
Yes, right? Yes, indeed. 20. Yes, that helps.
Yeah, it does help, and it makes it more fun. A big part of this whole thing, is play. It's just play. Creativity is play, and the more serious we get about it, the more that joy sort of dissipates. So it was really important for me to make it easy to understand and quick to read and all that kind of stuff, and get the point across that, hey, look, this is not brain surgery. This is not, the biggest thing in the world. It's just play with your creativity. And if you want to pursue it as a career, all you have to do, not all you have to do, but you focus, and it's just more time and more play. And yeah, of course, there's tasks you have to do, and it becomes work if you're going into more of a career with your creativity. But the bottom line is that playfulness and that passion is what makes things resonate with viewers or audiences or readers or whoever.
Mm-hmm. So you clearly have all these different facets to the way that you approach the world and your work and your creativity and so on. Is there one, if I said to you, Jeff, you've got to pick one for the rest of your life, you can't do any of the others, is there one that would be the true love of all of them, or is that an impossibility to figure out?
Well, that's like picking your favorite kid, right?
Of course.
They're different, and you love them for not exactly for different reasons, but there are different things that resonate with you. So, what would it be? I don't know. I love them all.
So, okay, so I think I know the answer to this. We may have already sort of touched on it, but do you have specific audience in mind as to who this is really designed for? Is it just creative people, or do you see this book having value to people that are doing things other than creative work?
Well, I would say that the audience is anyone who feels like they want to be creative and have not stepped into that as fully as they would like. And when I say creative, I really mean any kind of creativity. So the obvious ones that we're sort of talking about here are, writing and filmmaking and music and maybe visual arts, but it can be dance, it can be theater, it can be any of that kind of stuff. It can also be just, creative as a cook, cooking for your family.
Well, sure.
It can be creative in the way you speak and communicate, right? It can be creative in business. That's a huge one that I don't specifically address too much in the book, but creativity in business is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't, I think a lot of people don't understand that. Entrepreneurs don't necessarily understand that, but really creativity in business is one of the key components of making it work.
Of
If
course.
you're not creative, you're basically going to be doing what everybody else is doing, which is going to make your job a lot more difficult.
So that's what I was hoping you would say, because the word creative, I think, tends to connote to most people art. But scientists and mathematicians and doctors and lawyers, they're all creative in one way, shape, or form. And
yeah, hey, I would love to do, a workshop with a bunch of scientists. It would be quite interesting to apply these sorts of principles to that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, at the core, it is absolutely creative. I mean, Einstein, he knew he was a very creative guy.
Very.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the once in a generation true geniuses. Okay, so in the book you talk about questioning everything. What do you mean when you say creative types or people should question everything?
Well, the world around us does its best to influence our minds and thus our behavior. So the sort of top ways this happens is through family, through media, through peers, through institutions, education specifically, and through government. So these are the big things that our entire lives have been, imprinting our ideas about life, about who we are, et cetera, et cetera. If you do not question all of these pieces all of the time, you will default into what the culture, all those pieces of the culture are giving to you or broadcasting to you. And if you do that, you basically sort of become an automaton. You just react in a way that is not really very conscious. So I'm suggesting that you look at all of these pieces and question these things and determine who you really are underneath all of the fear, all of the social conditioning, all of these kinds of pieces that may be influencing you in ways that are not really true to you.
Does that mean you're questioning yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, questioning yourself and your relationship to these things. Start with family. What did you learn growing up about, what life is about, what your priorities are, all this kind of stuff? If that really resonates with you, then great, that's fine. But oftentimes that is not going to. In my personal story, my parents were great parents. They were very sort of, just, my dad was a lawyer, right? Just solid job, solid guy. My mom was doing sales, solid stuff, right? They didn't get the creativity part of me. So as I was growing up, it was always like, playing guitar is a hobby, right? And I'm like, no, it's not a hobby. It's a passion. It's who I am, Or, being a poet, being a writer, that's not a job. It's not it's not what you do. It's something that you do once in a while, for fun. And I had to question and really battle that for many years until I really came to my truth, which is I am a creative person. And if I do not act on that, it hurts my heart. And believe me, there were times, especially in my 20s, late 20s, when I was like, okay, I got to get it together. I got to do a normal job. I got to, sort of bow into these pressures that I thought were around me, and they were. And when I did that, it just started breaking my heart time and deeper and deeper until I finally had the strength to be like, okay, I'm doing music for real. And when I started doing that, like I said, I won that award. I got into music for film and TV. All these opportunities, started happening, and I was getting paid well for making music. And I believe that a huge part of this is because I eventually had the courage to really step into who I knew I was and take real action. Not just like, okay, I'm going to be a musician, but approach it as work. I mean, I worked. Did
your parents finally believe you?
They believed me when the paychecks started coming in.
Money's the root of all evil, but it cures a certain number of things too.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting because they were like, wow, this kid is, really believes it, has done it, and now is getting paid real money for doing it. And what was really interesting is they became my biggest fans through this process. It was like that struggle, within myself, really. And then when the breakthrough happened, sort of in the late 20s or early 30s, it almost flip-flopped.
That must be very
right?
fulfilling when that happens, yeah?
Absolutely. Totally fulfilling. And, I thank them for both pieces of that, meaning, I think the struggle against perhaps what they wanted for me, more stable job, all that kind of stuff, was actually fuel for me to work harder, almost to prove them wrong. I think we do that a lot in life.
Mm-hmm.
And really, if you've read books like Outliers.
Yes, Malcolm Gladwell.
Right? Malcolm Gladwell, fantastic book. He says that all of these top, really world-class types, they all have had experiences in their youth where somebody says, hey, you just can't do this. Michael Jordan, whatever, gets cut from his, high school basketball team or something like that. On and on and on. Top performers have been told they can't do it.
Right.
And that's part of, they say, fuck that, I'm doing it, get out of the way.
That's the drive. That's lights the fire.
Yeah, it's part of it.
Some people fold under that. Some people are told you can't do something and they fold, and some people do not. Some people absolutely, it lights the fire. It's the spark. So I think what you're alluding to is great, because for those folks listening to this podcast, if somebody's telling you, no, you can't do something, that may be a way to look at that, is to actually be the inspiration to, in fact, do something. Now, that's assuming you're not hurting yourself or others, I think there are limits to what we tell people sometimes. You can do whatever you want. It's America. You can do whatever you want. Well, there's a limit to some things. You might want to jump from the ground up to the moon, but that's not likely to happen. And so that goal may be just a little too high. You're going to require a rocket scientist to actually get you there. But nevertheless, in terms of growing as an artist, as a person, as a human being, you can, having someone tell you no is frequently a way to say yes by using it as a spark. I do know, I just want to continue that thought for 2 seconds, that I have discovered, I don't know, it's not my discovery, but it's, I've learned over time that people, especially in Hollywood, who are very successful, they actually do not hear the word no. When somebody says no to them, what they hear is maybe. And I think that the people that hear the word no, they go away, and they just don't succeed. And so the people that succeed have learned that the word no does not mean no. Now, sometimes those people can be a little bit, there can be an occasional person that does not hear the word no that may be a little crazy. And so that can be dangerous. But most people who are truly good at their art and really should be, producing it, they have to weather the brickbats of the negativity that comes with every art form.
Sure. So, part of what I hear when you say that, and I totally agree with that, is, do you internalize that no?
That's good.
And are you putting that no, are you linking it to your piece of art, your screenplay perhaps, or to you personally?
Right.
Like, as creators, one of the big mistakes that I think people make is they believe that their art is them.
Yes, that's right.
Right? And if somebody says, no, this screenplay isn't good enough, they hear it as, I'm not good enough.
Yes, sure.
And that is a very different thing. And again, that comes back to the NLP with the identity.
Now, that gets really tricky with people who their art form is called acting. And so when somebody rejects you, they are actually rejecting you, the way you look, the way you sound, your size, your shape. They're actually rejecting you for whatever reason. And you frequently don't know what that reason is. But actors have a little bit of that kind of odd narcissistic hurdle to get over, because they're rejecting the physical or the psychological you, because that's all you've got to present. So,
yeah, true.
But a musician who's playing or writing a song, or a writer or an artist, a painter, they're not necessarily, I mean, in some ways they might be judging you, but they aren't. They're judging the work, which is different. And so
Right.
actors, it is the work too. I'm not saying that there isn't work there, but in fact, a vast amount of the time for an actor, the judgment is you're too short, you're too tall, you're too skinny, you're too heavy, you're too light-skinned, you're too light-haired, whatever that is. It is actually about you. And
Yeah, but again, that's not. They're looking to fill a role.
that's right.
Right.
Oh, that's right. They
So-
have a job to do to fill that role. Correct.
Right. But if you're too tall, according to the casting director or whatever, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Of course
that just
not.
means you're tall.
That is my point. That
Yeah.
that we're talking about. But I'm saying it's a little trickier for that category of artist, because they're not presenting something that they have created outside of themselves. They're presenting themselves. The art is them. So that's psychologically a little trickier. That was my only point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't. It shouldn't be a reflection on who they are as a person. Though, in that, I'm saying that has this weird dichotomy, because in a way it does. But it shouldn't cause them to go batty over it. Well, let's go back to not effing around. I too, you say in the book that you should never wait to start. Just start. You don't need to prepare to start. Just start. I too believe in that. That's a similar to the phrase "ready, fire, aim." And are there things that one should do in your life's work, in your career, and in specific projects that to help you to prepare, oddly enough, to prepare before you start, even though you should just start anyway? Is there anything in life that should prepare you to just go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it depends, what you're talking about, obviously. Some things you want to be sure you are ready before you do it. If you're going to be doing, brain surgery, obviously you better train quite well before you start cutting into somebody's head.
Good idea.
But, right, things like this. However, for artistic endeavors, one of the things that I see in a lot of people is that they are too concerned, in my opinion, with making things perfect, with learning how to do it exactly right, this and that sort of thing, rather than, hey, I'm going to paint this painting, and yeah, I'll show it, or I'll put it out, or at least put it online, right? Just something to move forward, rather than spending 10 years painting before you put something out, right? So what can you do to get ready? You just do it. You just do your thing. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this book. You get out of your way, you do your thing, and you step forward. And guess what? It's not going to be the best thing you've ever done, hopefully, right? And I tell this to my songwriting students. Some of them get so freaked out about writing a song. And I'm like, hey, look, this is homework in college. If you're a musician and a songwriter, you're going to be doing this for the next 30 years. You think this is going to be your best song? No way. So just do it.
Well,
right?
yes, and I frequently will tell my students, it is the truth, that very rarely does your first effort of anything become the final product. It almost always takes rewriting and revision and working at it and polishing and so on. That is a mistake that I think that newer artists make in thinking, oh, look, I've made this thing. It's done. Well, usually it's not done. It's a good start. That's unfortunate.
Right.
But
exactly.
yes, but I agree with your philosophy that if you don't start to do something, you have nothing. So you have to start somewhere and just go at it. I think that's really good. You also you also have this notion of failing fast and learning from your mistakes. I know George Bernard Shaw once said that a man who makes no mistakes makes nothing at all. And so it's all about making mistakes. Tell me your philosophy on that.
So yeah, in the book, one of the chapters is fail fast. And, basically what I'm saying is it's not failure. Like, failure is such a loaded word. Nobody wants to fail, right? So what it is reframing the experience into a learning process. Okay, whatever it is you're doing didn't go the way you wanted it to go. Fine, that's the truth. Now look at it, and what can you learn from this? Why didn't it go the way you wanted it to go? Mm-hmm. It's really your best learning experiences are your so-called failures, because it gives you an opportunity to step back and to look deeply at all the components of why it didn't work the way you wanted it to. So for instance, entrepreneurs are, they have data on this. Most entrepreneurs fail, like go bankrupt, like their companies do not work, I think 3 or 4 times before they're successful, right? Because what happens is they start a business, it's going okay, but they screw it up, oops, bad news. Except the smart ones will take a step back and go like, we scaled this thing too fast, or the people that I hired weren't really aligned with my vision, or, we borrowed too much money, like whatever the components were. And then they start their next business. And hopefully they use that input from the first failure to do better. And then you have different problems and different challenges and different failures, and you figure those out, step it up the third time, and bam, you have your hit. Mm-hmm. And you've got your company and it works.
Well, they're the two big, what I think of as the two big fears that sort of seem opposite, but they're similar. There's the fear of failure, and a lot of artists mm-hmm. suffer from the fear of failure. I think, mm-hmm. and business people and other creative types. But I think there's also this funny thing that people have sometimes called a fear of success. And that fear, too, has to be overcome for some people. That, what do I do with it once I have it? I'll be the dog that caught the car. Now what do I do with it? And so that holds some people back. I think that starting and doing the work helps to overcome all that. I think that's what you're alluding to, and I think that's a very good message. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you also in the book talk about risk-taking, or what you call playing unsafe. What are good risks, and how can they help an artist?
Well, when you look at life, there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of, basically infinite things that you can do. And some of them require massive risk, and some of them require very little risk, okay? And then, of course, you've heard of, sort of risk-reward ratio, which means how much do you put down, and what is the potential upside, right? In every situation, you're going to have different versions of this. So depending on where you are in life, are you 25 years old and just got out of college and you want to go on tour with your rock band? Yeah, that's a risk that perhaps a 50-year-old with a wife and kids is not going to want to take, right? Yeah. There's different kinds of risk, and there's different potential upsides. So you kind of have to identify what is worth it to you, and then take the risks that are, that are right for you. So I'm not suggesting that you quit your job and move to New York City to be a painter, unless that is a risk that you are willing to take. And perhaps in some people's lives that is. But just what tends to happen is, as people get older, they feel compelled to have more safety and security in their lives. And I get it, and that's part of the life cycle.
Well, right? Sometimes sometimes people wind up with a spouse and children in a house, and suddenly taking that risk is putting others at risk.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So you have to be conscious of that, but at the same time, you have to be conscious that you don't have to be 100% safe all the time. Mm-hmm. So if you, again, as a screenwriter, we'll just use that as an example, you want to sell your screenplay to Hollywood. Well, guess what? And you live in New Jersey. Well, maybe it's worth a couple $1,000s to go to LA for a week and schedule as many meetings with producers, or go to a pitch fest, or, like, just spend some money and take a week instead of going on a vacation, right? You spend that money and pursue your dreams with that time and money. Oftentimes people aren't willing to take even that kind of risk.
So I think you're saying something important here, that frequently when people hear the word risk taking, it means everything. It doesn't. You can take small risks. They don't.
Right.
It doesn't have to be one and all.
Exactly.
Good.
And as a matter of fact, a huge risk, 100% risk, that's a pretty bold action, which in most cases I personally wouldn't recommend. Sometimes maybe. I mean, you hear these stories like of filmmakers. Oh, I wanted to make my indie film, and I put $300,000 on credit cards, which is just like, man, that is crazy.
That's because in the history of Hollywood there have been people like Robert Townsend who made a movie on his credit cards, and once that became a story in the news, other people think, oh, I can do that, and then they go bankrupt.
Right.
So yeah, that's a huge risk, and there's a degree of luck involved in the backside of it. And so the risk taking is very important in terms of creating the art or creating your passion or fulfilling your passion, but you have to be smart about it too. It's not just throwing everything away.
Exactly.
So you also talk in the book about the universe reflecting what you put in. Would you say that is similar to the concept of karma or the notion of cause and effect?
Yeah, I would. I believe that the energy, the world sort of works on different levels. One of the levels is pretty obvious, and that is the more work you do, the more you step out into the world in whatever way that means, the more response is likely to come to you. For instance, if you are, let's just go back to the screenplay bit. If you are trying to sell your screenplay and you wrote your screenplay and it's sitting there on your desk and, wow, nobody's calling you. Okay. Well, what if you make 100 calls to relevant movie producers and emails to people, do the research, put all this out? Well, guess what? Some of them are going to respond, right? So action in the world equals a reaction, towards your end. That's just obvious, right?
Sure.
The magical part that I see is that when you put energy and when you decide that something that you want is going to happen, the world in this sort of magical or metaphysical way starts to align itself in ways that you can't control that help and benefit you. So, for instance, I had this experience years ago where I'm looking for a job. I need a new job, whatever. So I'm putting out all this energy, making all these calls, doing all this kind of stuff to try to get this new job. And then out of the blue comes a call from somebody that I haven't talked to in 5 years. Says, hey, Jeff, I have this great job for you. It's like the perfect job. It has nothing to do with the, physical, obvious energy that I'm putting out into the world. But out of nowhere, this guy thinks of me, calls me, and I get this amazing gig.
That is magical, isn't it? I mean, when this happens, because this has happened to me many times, where you finally start to do the work of whatever that is, and other magical things occur. Other people show come out of the woodwork, just like you say.
Yeah. How it works, why it works, who knows? But in my experience, in your experience, and I think a lot of your listeners' experience, if you think about it, it really is true. It's just you put out the energy and the passion and the truth of who you are and what you want, and the world sort of aligns towards that goal if it's true for you.
Right.
Like that's the key. It has to be true for you. If it's something that's not real, that's not passionate, that's not truly aligned with who you are, it's really not going to work in that way, I believe.
All right, so tell
but
us.
if it is,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that's a very valid way to look at it. There's can't really explain it. It's a little mysterious, but it is something that happens, and I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of it from lots of artists who have this weird thing happen when they start to do the work. So doing the work, going back to your earlier point, is just do it, and then that will lead to other things happening, especially with that work. Tell me a little bit about the inner critic, your IC.
The IC, which I call the ick.
The ick.
The inner critic. The ick. Yeah, so the inner critic is built into us all, and, I believe it's there to keep us safe. The world is, in many ways, a dangerous place. There are many factors of risk and danger, from millions of years ago getting eaten by the tiger to today getting hit by a bus or losing your, credit or, who knows what. There's just a million things. So the inner critic has evolved to keep us safe, and that's fine because we need to be safe. We don't want to get hit by a bus or eaten by the tiger. However, if you let the inner critic stop you from taking risks that aren't really risks in the first place in any big way, that is when you're going to be shut down and going to be stopped from stepping forward. So artists and creative types get this a lot. The inner critic is going to say, oh, that painting is not as good as these other painters that you admire. So the inner critic says, you suck, and then you don't put it out. You stop working towards it. These kinds of things, right? We've all experienced this.
Definitely.
If you let the inner critic rule your world, it will shut you down. It will stop you from succeeding, and that is a guarantee. I've seen it a billion times in people. If they let it happen, if they let it have too large of a voice, it will stop them from creating their dreams, because the inner critic will say, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you don't have enough motivation, just et cetera, until you believe that voice, and then what are you doing? You're sitting around watching TV all day.
Yeah.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, nothing happens, and then you stop doing that thing. You stop doing. Just do it. You're not doing it. You're doing the opposite.
And the important thing to remember, and I talk about this in the book, is it's just a voice. It's just one aspect of yourself. There's another aspect of yourself that, if developed properly and developed well over time, can say, hey, I hear you, right? Maybe this isn't as good as it will be in the future, but here's what we've got now. Let's put it out. Let's keep going. Let's learn. Let's make the skills better that are going to get us closer to our goals.
Well, again, it's
doing
that work.
Yeah, it's doing the work. Again, it's similar, in a way, to this fail fast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The inner critic is saying you're not good enough. Well, guess what? Become good enough. Right?
Yeah.
Get better.
Right. Get better.
It's just the friction like I was talking about before. Somebody tells you you're not good enough, don't internalize it as you're not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's, maybe it's the work isn't as good as it could be.
That's
all it is.
What do you do to stay disciplined and not distracted?
Good one. Well, for me, one of the huge ways to keep going in the path that I choose is something that my dad taught me many years ago. He said, Jeff, I'm like a high school kid or something. He says, to get stuff done, you got two things. You got lists and piles. Okay? Piles, you put physical things in a pile, separated in whatever categories or whatever ways you need. And the second thing is make a list, make a to-do list of here's what needs to be done. And then once you know the list, you just do it. So I took this in my, into my consciousness, whatever, as a kid, And then a couple years later, I went to my dad's office, and like I said, he's a lawyer, and I go and I see on his desk, he literally has a pile of lists. I'm like, nice one. And on the top is the list that says, this will be done today. And at the bottom is the list of, it would be nice to do this stuff, and it might take me 2 years, paint the garage, like that kind of stuff. Just like, it would be great to have it happen, but it's not exactly really urgent. So for me, I've taken that into the digital age, of course, and I've got, an app that I can categorize basically in the same way. Here's what's going to happen today. Here's what's going to happen this week. Here's what's going to happen by the end of the month. And here's the goals for the whole year. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's dynamic, right? Things come up that require urgency, and that's fine. But just having, if you know where you're going, it's a lot easier to go there, because if you're running around your day trying to figure out what the next step is, you're wasting energy. It's much better to take an hour and write your list of the logical steps towards your goal, and then you just have to execute. It really is so much easier to do it that way.
I think that's very, very valuable. So I'm curious, in your long experiences as an artist and also as a life coach and so on, I'm wondering, you've probably met one or two strange characters, or you've had some weird experiences in your career. Do you have any one particular experience that you could tell us that would be kind of funny or oddball or weird in some way?
Yeah, sure. This was a really cool experience I had in the 90s. I moved to Seattle at the end or the crest of the grunge era and the beginning of the internet. There was a thing called a website that people were getting excited about.
Ooh, that thing.
And, yeah, right. So I got hired by the big rock radio station that broke all this grunge stuff to the world to be the writer for their website. And so I would interview bands and do record reviews and go to shows and stuff. It was amazing. One of the experiences was with this band called Everclear, which was out of Portland, right? And they were a big 90s band. So I interviewed them before they were famous, and they took me, they lived in Portland. So I drove down to Portland, like 3 hours away, and these three guys were living in this house, and we had this interview, and we're hanging out, and it's all cool, and they're all excited about their career, but it really wasn't taken off yet. And they invited me to come into their basement and they wanted to play a couple songs for me. So I was like, yeah, great. So we go into the basement, and they play the songs, and the main guy, the singer, Alex, is telling the other guys, the drummer, hey, you're doing this wrong, change this, They're working on their songs basically while I'm there, which was exactly like every other band that I had ever been in high school. Right. It was just a couple years later, and these guys had a record deal and were touring and stuff. So that was great. About 6 months later, the radio station had a big summer concert and invited Everclear to play it. And Everclear got to play on the main stage in front of 20,000 people. And this was their first time. They were getting bigger, but this was like a huge step. They went from playing 300 people in a club to 20,000 at this festival. It was a huge deal. And I interviewed the band right after they got off the stage. And I remember this guy said, this was just like Paradise City, the Guns N' Roses video, if your listeners, if you know this, playing in front of zillions of people and being a rock star. Like, this was his first moment of really big time. Mm-hmm. And you could feel the energy coming off this guy, because literally his dream had just come true.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got to witness that transition from, here's three guys in the basement struggling to, we just played in front of 20,000 screaming people. Pretty cool.
Pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, we're coming toward the end of the show. We've had this been an outstanding conversation about creative process and how artists go about their business. I'm just wondering, do you have one good, solid piece of advice or a tip that perhaps you can lend to our listeners, especially those who are trying to find their way into having a career?
Well, taking all the stuff we talked about, combining it into what is true for you, right? How much risk are you willing to take in this part of your life? How much can you decide that this is what you want? How can you, deal with your inner critic in a way that makes sense for you so that you can overcome the big question that we said at the start is why? Why are you doing this? If you're doing it for fame or ego or money, that's the wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You need to dig deeper and understand really why you want to tell your story or express yourself or create your business or whatever your creative thing is. Doesn't matter. You need to know why, because once you know why, you have a purpose and you have a mission, and that's very different than just doing it because it's fun or doing it because you think you're going to have a hit song or whatever.
Or you're going to get rich.
Or you're going to get rich, yeah. I mean, any of these creative pursuits, getting rich is sort of the last thing you should be thinking about, because your likelihood, quite honestly, of getting rich it's a lot more likely to just get a freaking job and work your way up, right?
Very
so
good.
If that's really what you want, do that.
Very good and sound advice. Well, I've been speaking today to Jeff Leisawitz. His book is Not Effing Around, the No Bullshit Guide for Getting Your Creative Dreams Off the Ground. Jeff, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show, and I think we've learned a lot of very, very valuable lessons today, so I thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been great.
Today's StoryBeat tip. Every character worth getting to know should come with two things. One, a clear goal, and two, a flaw. The story's inciting incident should establish a goal that drives the protagonist toward pursuing that goal. Of course, this must occur early enough in the story that the protagonist has something powerful to pursue. It's useful to reveal early your protagonist's personal flaw. It can be anything that challenges the character, ranging from physical issues such as arthritis or halitosis, leprosy, deafness, a speech impediment, or any number of problems physically, to psychological or emotional problems like agoraphobia or naivete, neediness, depression, perhaps the inability to deal with people, to spiritual difficulties like demonic possession or blind righteousness or a lack of faith. Such flaws are limitless, so have fun finding your hero something personal to deal with. It's helpful to determine the protagonist's flaw by taking into account the protagonist's wants versus his needs. Like the goal, his flaw ought to be obvious or at least understandable to the audience early on, because it will become important late in the story's resolution. How? It's very powerful when your hero's flaw is used or overcome in order to achieve the protagonist's resolution to his or her goal. The flaw need not be overt, it can be subtle, but it needs to be used or surmounted by the time the protagonist fights through the worst parts of the climax. When a protagonist overcomes his or her flaw, or uses it to his or her advantage, this adds a level of emotion to the story's cathartic effect. For example, in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker starts out being unsure of trusting his instincts, yet he saves the day by letting go and trusting in the Force. One flaw is all that is required for each character, but establishing a flaw and then using it or overcoming it will have a potent influence on how the audience perceives the protagonist's journey. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.